know that. Yeah, you're okay. It's all right. You're okay. Okay. Okay, you can hear me? Yes. Okay. I'll check, I can check the volume.
They can hear you.
Part of the phone number there.
Thank you.
Is this better? Yeah. Okay. Grace asked me to open this meeting in our year together, and it's so good seeing everyone all back together, and I hope you enjoyed a good summer full of lots of good books and good reading time. As you may know, Grace and Jim are on a cruise to Ireland and Scotland with a stop in Belgium. So we'll be thinking about them for safe and smooth travels. They are cruising from New York and back to New York. So it is a lot of time on the ship. So we'll have to have her report to us when she gets back. We have a few announcements. There are new Women of the Church directories that Lellen designed this year. They have a lot of good and helpful information. If you are not in another circle and would like a directory, please take one. Your other circles that are meeting this month will have additional copies if needed. Certain meetings are starting soon. I think everyone here is part of a circle, but if not, please read up and join one. All the schedules are listed in the directory. This year we're studying Max Lucado's book on the life of James. So it will be a good study this year. And the first big Women of the Church event this year is Ladies' Night Out on Tuesday, October 14th at our hostess, Melinda Biggs' house. So thank you, Melinda. So before I introduce our speaker, Martha, who everyone knows, I don't need to introduce her, I just need to welcome her. If you'll join me in prayer, let's bow our heads. Dear Lord, thank you for this beautiful day and for bringing us together for another year of friendship and fellowship as we meet. We thank you also for blessing each of us with a shared love of reading and this chance to join as a group to discuss the written words and the stories that connect us. We are grateful that through books you give us opportunities to learn more about your beautiful world, to be introduced to new ideas and perspectives, and to further enrich us in learning about historical characters and events. We pray that you continue to keep our minds always open to wanting to learn more, to gaining additional knowledge, and to be introduced to new subjects and understandings. You are a most gracious Father, and we pray that you be with this church to guide and direct the many studies, classes, ministries, and programs as all begin anew and throughout this year. We also ask that you be with each of us gathered here, that you will direct and guide our steps to follow you more closely. In your name we pray. Amen. One other announcement, this is a great copy of the September issue of First Pres. You can read it online or in the bookshelf or pamphlet rack across from the workroom. There are several copies. I just grabbed this one. And it is full of so much information about everything that's starting this year. There are pages and pages about classes and programs. And so anyway, this is good reading too. So we are so glad to have Martha Smith be reviewing for us again this year. It's always a treat to hear from Martha. And everyone knows her. She and her husband Gordon are very involved with their church. Both are serving as deacons this year. And I asked her last night, she is beginning, she couldn't remember, her 32nd or 33rd year as a professor in the English department at UTSA. So it's always good to hear from Martha. And today she'll be discussing the German wife.
Okay, here we go. Well, it's great to see y'all today. And World War II books, the genre of World War II books are so popular right now, and as are movies. So I really look forward to reading this book, and it's sort of a different take on World War II, a part that I didn't know about before I read this book, and maybe y'all felt the same way. Okay, so whenever I'm doing a book review, the first thing I do is I look up the author as a good starting point. Well, there is not much out there on Kelly Rimmer. And in fact, when I looked her up on Wikipedia, this is all it said about her in Wikipedia. Kelly Rimmer is an Australian author of romance fiction and historical fiction. She has stated that a historical fiction author needs research and daydreaming. She plots her books before she begins to write them. She lives in New South Wales, Australia. She owns a bookshop, Collins Booksellers Orange, which she purchased in 2022. So that was not a lot to go on there, but I found a really interesting interview on YouTube where someone from Australia was interviewing her, and I learned a lot of really interesting things from that interview that I'm going to share with you. And she talked about how she became a writer, her writing process, and additional information about the German wife. So I'm going to share a lot about that interview with you. So if you've already read the book, I think learning some of this stuff will enhance your appreciation of it. And if you haven't read the book, maybe it'll pique your interest in reading the book, and it won't give away any ending either. But interestingly, the author lives in a tiny village in Australia, and she said her town doesn't even have a main street. And for years before she was a writer, she worked as a project manager for an Australian software developer, a life very far removed from the life of a writer. She had a secret hobby, writing, that really no one knew about. She lived in a flat with another woman, and so she said even her flatmate didn't know that she was writing like all night long, and she had that secret hobby. But she did always want to be a writer, and she thought that was really a reach, that someone like her could be a writer, anyway, I'll get to this in a minute, but she thought it was very improbable that someone like her could become a writer. But, and she said she's sort of sensitive, so the thought about her putting her writing out there made her really nervous, because she was nervous about any negative feedback that she might get. And she thought it was too bold to think that someone would read a book that she wrote. But she also had a secret goal to publish something by age 35. And again, she hadn't told anyone that goal, but she thought about it when she was 33. And she thought, okay, I've got to get moving. So she had been working on something for 10 years that no one knew that she had been working on. And she said that day, she moved forward to self-publish it. And she said that she did a lot of things wrong in the process of self-publishing this book, but she did some things right. And she said she did get some negative feedback, but she also got some positive feedback. And she learned, that she could take it and that it was okay. So she got some confidence. Eventually, she quit her day job, telling her husband, okay, I want to give writing 1 year, and if it doesn't work out, I can still go back to my job as a project manager for the software company. She said now it would be much too late for her to go back, because she would have to relearn or learn a lot about computers that she didn't know at the time. And now she has passed the 2 million books sold milestone. And when she became a full-time writer and quit her job, she told her husband, wouldn't it be amazing to think that 1,000 people would read my book? And so she's passed the 2 million mark, which she just can't believe that. Early in her career, she wrote issue-focused books, but now she writes what most people call historical fiction. She doesn't really think of herself as a historical fiction writer. She says, quote, I just like writing about people. Which is interesting. I like historical fiction, actually. I like history, pure history too. And when I read this book, in a way it left me wanting more historical fiction about these scientists. And I've done I read Wikipedia, did a little research on my own, and that would be a really interesting topic for a book, just to focus on that project. Okay, so how did she get the idea to write this book? There was a festival in July 2019 in the next bigger town to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the moon landing. So she and a friend went and took their kids for the day, for this festival, and she saw a display, and it was there that she learned about these German scientists who are part of the Operation Paperclip. And, you know, that really opened her eyes. She was so intrigued and interested in that. And as you know, this is a quote from Wikipedia, but if you didn't know about Operation Paperclip, it was a secret United States intelligence program in which more than 1,600 Nazi German scientists, engineers, and technicians were taken from former Nazi Germany to the United States for government employment after the end of World War II. And many of these members were leaders of the Nazi Party, although their records were, you know, wiped clean, so that was not widely known. And actually I read, after being in America for not too long of a time, many were given American citizenship. Okay. And I wrote my aside, is the historical story of Operation Paperclip is so interesting. And you know what? It's like, it's poignant, it's sad, it's inspiring, you know, so someday if you want to go down that rabbit hole, you might want to read more about that and watch some YouTube videos, as I did. Okay, and in fact, the character of Jürgen seems loosely based on the most famous scientist in the Operation Paperclip program, Wernher von Braun, the scientist who had led the development of the V2 rocket for Germany and who later played a prominent role in the US space program. Okay, so she had this flare of curiosity, as she called it, and she really needed to understand how these scientists worked in America and what their experience was like. And she said also there was something about our current history, you know, that to her seems a little unstable, that captured her imagination. She wanted to look back to see what we have and have not learned from our past. Okay, so she started to research the topic, and from her tiny, remote Australian village, she immersed herself in podcasts and interviews, journals, and diaries. And she studied photographs. She said she gets a lot of inspiration from looking at just still photographs of the time, and she looks at the buildings, the dress, the architecture, and so really she said she got a lot of inspiration, not only from journals, diaries, but really from photographs. So she describes her process as research, daydream, and write. However, I also heard, like, she wrote this book pretty quickly, so I don't think there was just like a ton of daydreaming going on. Okay. A unique aspect of this book is how it goes back and forth from Germany, Huntsville, and Texas. And you might be interested in how she created those different stories and different timelines. First of all, to make sure all the details, the historical details and the character details lined up, there is a software where she first entered all the historical details of the Dust Bowl, World War II, the 1950s, and then she added character dates, like when her characters would have been born and married, and the software makes sure everything lines up. And I mean, leave it to a program developer to know how to do that. So that she said keeps all of those historical dates and her character dates lined up. Another interesting point is she wrote the story chronologically, and then she chopped it up. And as I wrote that, I was like, is that my word that she chopped it up? Or did she say she chopped it up? I think she might have said she chopped it up. But interestingly, there is another software program that chops it up for you. So she put her story in and then turned it over to software that like mixed it up. I don't know about that, but we'll have to talk about that. And she wanted to show the events that informed the character's behavior. She said she knows she's asking a lot of the reader, to go back and forth in time and place, but she said she had to trust the reader to follow her. The back and forths show distinct periods in the characters and the characters' development. For example, Lizzie is different in different timelines. The Lizzie of the 1930s is different to the fierce Lizzie of the 1950s, and they're almost different characters. And I put a note in here to say, like, I'll tell you my confession. It took me far too long to realize it was the same Lizzie. I mean, to connect those dots, I'm like, I think that's the same one from the Dust Bowl. But anyway, y'all were probably more on top of that than I was. So that confused me a little bit. But she wanted to show how the characters became who they became. She wanted to go on a journey with the characters and start with their backstory. Okay, another interesting part of her writing process is she uses a drag and dictate to create her drafts. So she would dictate it into software that then puts it on her computer. And she said the secret there for her is just to get it out. And then she said her real skill, she feels, is editing and revising. So that first draft she dictates and just gets it out. And she said that works for her and for her book, she thinks, because she wants a real conversational style. She wants you to feel like you're sitting with the characters over a cup of tea. She said, I just want to get through the first draft quickly, edit into something good. It just needs to be written, and then I can mold and shape it. Okay, so that's a lot of interesting stuff, don't you think, about where she was from and how she wrote and how she made that happen. And the story focuses on two women, Lizzie and Sophie, who meet in the 1950s in Huntsville, and they get off to a rocky start from the very beginning. They clash, there's conflict. The author wanted to see if the two characters had more in common than we think. And really, I'd like to turn that over to you. You know, can you think of things they had in common? Do you think they had more in common than we think? They certainly made it through struggles. I guess they protected their family. Okay, I'm Team Sophie. Let's just get it out there. So anyway, but that's interesting that the author in the back of her head was thinking, you know, to focus on what they have in common. The author, Rimmer, said that Sophie's point of view is challenging because in the author's words, she said, I agonized over presenting Sophie because we're looking at her behavior as people who know what happened. And the reader's going to judge her because we know where this is going. And Sophie, she feels, you know, doesn't know the consequences of the day-to-day decisions they're making. But, you know, really, some of those decisions are not really decisions. I mean, she was in a really difficult spot. And I said, that's sort of what it made it sort of hard for me to read the book, both about the Dust Bowl and about, you know, World War II and the Nazis, because I'm like, this is not going to be good, you know, and so, like, I just had to keep turning pages and think, like, you know, it's going to be hard because we know what happens. Okay, so I have some quotations just to show, in my mind, like, there's a sense of foreboding, you know, as you read both parts of the story. So, you know, and then there's Lizzie's family that for a long time just kept thinking next year will be better. You know, and I was like, it's not going to get better. I sense it's not going to get better. So here's a quotation from Lizzie. I couldn't sleep that night. There was so little I could control. I couldn't make it rain. I couldn't make Dad face reality. I couldn't move the cows away from the mud. And, you know, I do think if you're trying to think about what the characters have in common, there was so much that Sophie couldn't control. And, you know, there was this character of the judge who had been helpful, lending money to the brother. But, you know, what really hit me is where when they saw the judge, maybe, I can't remember if it was at church, and the quote is, the judge wasn't angry, he was heartbroken, somehow that was worse. So seeing that the judge, who had been the person who had more control over the situation, to see that the judge was heartbroken, you know, that's when they really saw the writing on the wall, I think. The dad, though, had words of wisdom, which I thought were good at one point, and he said, dry comes and goes. You'll see that in life. Good, bad, exciting, boring. Life is all about the ebb and flow between those extremes, and sometimes you just have to patiently ride it out. Okay, so then in Germany, we also, see this arc of events, and I have some quotations here. So Sophie first attends a rally with her neighbor and came home really shaken by that and was telling her friend Mayim about it. And she said, quote, they adjust their rhetoric depending on where the rally is being held. In the country, they can say what they really mean, but we're in the cosmopolitan city, so I suppose here they know how to hide their hate beneath a veneer of respectability. That was at the beginning. And then, of course, later they didn't need to hide their hate. One speaker at the event looked to the past and found a villain he did not need to name. Here's a quote. The Treaty of Versailles was designed only to cripple us. Blah, blah, blah. We all knew this was a clear reference to the long-standing conspiracy theory that Germany had not really lost the Great War, but that our brave soldiers were betrayed by those at home, mostly Jews, who fomented unrest and undermined the war effort. So you just see these seeds building. Karl, the neighbor, said, when the Nazis come to power, they'll end all the madness and things will get back to normal. Then the Nazis controlled the papers. And so Jürgen explained to Sophie, the papers say what the Nazis want them to say now that the Reichstag fired decrees enables them to control what's published. So you just, of course, we knew this was coming, but you just read it going from bad to worse. And back to Lizzie, when Lizzie's mother was in the middle of all this, she says, quote, it's tiring trying to make sense of things that make no damn sense at all. Okay, so over time, you see the characters feel trapped. Then you see the Nazis' power progressively go stronger and worse. Characters had no privacy. Neighbors are spying on you. They learned that the hard way. Then, the scientist who was Jürgen, who was so excited, to be using his expertise. Then he realized the rockets were being weaponized, so that was another thing he had to make. I said these were very hard decisions, but really very hard decisions, because what are you going to do? Are you going to, put your whole family at risk? I mean, how can you get out of there? So he said, all right-minded German parents are trapped, just as we are. I don't even think we have a right to complain. The cage we're trapped in is at least a gilded one. And then, consequences too, with Sophie's children ended up being indoctrinated into the Hitler Youth Program. And, to hear her children say these things, and she couldn't really, she felt she couldn't do anything. Okay, then the focus moves to Huntsville, a community torn apart when the scientists from Operation Paperclip and their families moved to work on the U.S. space program. And when I read about the Paperclip program, Operation Paperclip, that really happened. In Huntsville, all these people moved in with their families, and it was, it was very difficult for the scientists and their families to live there, as you can imagine. So hate is probably a theme of this book, how dangerous hate is. But, Lizzie feels it's okay to hate the Nazis and feels the Americans are right to punish the scientists if they can. She says to her husband, men like that don't change, Calvin. There's no doubt at all for her who the villains are. Lizzie's brother has PTSD. She feels the Germans did this to her brother. At one point, Sophie points out to Lizzie, hey, America has its own issue. Like, have you noticed the signs on your doors about segregation? And the question is, are Lizzie's actions vengeance or justice? Where does one end and the other begin? So can you sense, I don't know exactly what to say about the book. I'd liked it. I'm glad I read it. I learned a lot about Operation Paperclip. It's hard for me to analyze it as much. And you know what? It was funny because just this morning I watched two brief, like 1-minute clips of Kelly Rimmer, and here's what she said. So in the first clip, she said, "It's a story about what happens when one loses oneself. This is a story about how far one will go to protect one's family." I'm like, okay. Well, then, like a few minutes later, I found another 30-second clip, and she said, "It's a story about survival. It's also a story about what happens when we forget to think of those we disagree with as human." Okay, so totally, I mean, you know, it all works together, but I thought, okay, well, that makes me feel a little better because the author herself, like, came up with 2 different answers about what the book is about. It's about a lot, really, and so, you know, hate, protecting family, not treating those we disagree with as not human, survival, you know, all of those are themes there. Okay, do you all have any comments you want to make, anything that stuck out with you about the book? What did you all think about the back and forth, location to location?
I was wondering if there was something wrong with my brain.
Yeah, thank you.
The nonlinear narrative was extraordinarily confusing.
Yeah, it was to me too.
Yeah. Now I wanna say something good. I should have
Okay.
said this first. This story needed to be told, fact or fiction, about what those scientists went through, because this story is not unusual except in the violence that occurred.
Right.
Yeah. So I'm glad it was told.
I'm glad it was told too, and really, I think someone should write a book, and probably has, you know, with more detail about the scientists' plight and who they were, and I mean, it's tricky. It's really tricky because I heard the story about one of the scientists who, you know, had done so much for our moon landing and everything, and then when he was, you know, 88 or whatever, he was interviewed, like, let's look at your past, let's find these records and let's look at your past. And for a couple of days he was interrogated, and then he was going to go on trial, and he just thought his health couldn't take it, so he gave up American citizenship and agreed to move away. And even his colleagues in Huntsville, like, didn't know what had happened until after he left. You know, so this is far-reaching, way after this. It, you know, maybe that's another theme. Your past stays with you. You know, that's good. I should have written that down. Okay, so I thought that back and forth was difficult, and you know, now that I read, like, software did it, maybe that explains it, right? Yeah.
I thought that was interesting how you said the software, she dictated it, because it had a dictated feel to me. It wasn't like this perfectly crafted sentence that you go back and reread because it's so gorgeous. It was more, like you said, conversational, and
Right.
and I had trouble with Lizzie too. I'm like, is this the same Lizzie? How does someone change that much and not have any empathy for, I guess, that sentiment, that anti-Nazi, what had happened, especially with her brother?
And maybe her brother.
Yeah, just
Yeah.
tore her apart, yeah.
Yeah.
I thought, but then I also thought the school children and how they manipulated them through their kids, I hadn't thought about that.
Right.
That was shocking
Yeah.
and terrifying.
Could you summarize what you said? I couldn't.
Oh, yes, so she said it's, to her it sounded dictated, like the flow of the sentences. It didn't contain a lot of sentences that you want to go back and read, like, you know, wow, that is so beautifully written or whatever, but it did sound conversational. And she said she also thought Lizzie, like, was 2 different characters almost, like, how did that Lizzie become this Lizzie? And then also the children, she was surprised how the children were made to be a part of this and manipulate the situation.
Yeah, there's one, for me, historical fiction has to be believable,
Mm-hmm.
and there's one character in the book that is not believable to me, and it's Henry. I understand post-traumatic syndrome, that's not the problem.
Right.
It's real, I've seen it, I've lived with it. I know unfortunately, lots of people who were ill-treated. But Lizzie's love for Henry is very challenging for me to even accept it as authentic
Mm-hmm.
because of the way Renner presented it. It's almost obsessive, well, it's not almost, it is obsessive.
Yes.
Yeah, to the point where she is denying the reality of his PTS.
Right.
She says in one paragraph, I know he'll never get well. And in the very end of the book, she says, but he's welcome to live with me.
Right. Yeah.
He's an absolute threat to her safety and
I
her
have a
life.
cousin though that has somebody that is similar to him. And she's smart. She is exactly the same way.
Yeah.
One minute she's saying, oh, I'm never gonna let him into our life, and the next minute she's giving him a lot of money. And saying, can you believe that he got arrested and the false charges? I mean, so I see it.
The only thing that can remotely make it feasibly real is that it must be guilt.
Yeah.
Because when he started experiencing, she started witnessing this terrific anxiety and the nightmares and the violent behavior, and she saw him slipping away. She didn't do anything about it. So it could have been guilt, and we're supposed to figure that out.
Yeah. Yes.
Well, in her defense, I think he was the only link to her past. He was the only person in her family, and she had changed, and her life had changed so much that he was the only link back to her past again. And that's what I kind of felt that she and Sophie had in common. They both had to become someone else than who they really were because of circumstances. And they couldn't really understand each other, and we do the same thing. We judge people, and we have no idea what they've been through, like
Right.
what Sophie went through.
Right. That's an interesting point, if y'all didn't hear that, one thing they have in common is they both had to become someone who they weren't originally. And that, I think that's a really good point. Sophie had, it's obvious how both had to change completely. Yeah.
You know, I had a little trouble with her brother too, but her dad was mentally ill. And I wondered if she just had a history of dealing with mental illness and
Yeah.
then got PTSD on top of it. However, her dad remained pretty functional. I know I had initially had a little problem with that too. But I thought that was interesting that she made her dad mentally ill.
Right.
That was
And then her husband,
Yeah.
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 I thought it was interesting how they brought in the no whites, because when I first started reading it, I thought of that. My grandmother used to say she understood how she grew up she was in Mississippi, and she said she understood how the Nazis, were so afraid to even tell people that they were not part of the party or part of the party. I mean, because that's the way people felt with the KKK. Nobody talked about it, and everybody just kind of steered away from it because they were so afraid of getting retribution. And my family, my grandfather had Molotov cocktails thrown through his building and a cross burned on his yard. And
And he was a journalist,
he was
right?
a journalist.
And
So,
what town?
in
that
Macomb, Mississippi, it was in 1964, I believe.
That is so
Maybe
hard to believe,
68.
isn't it?
What was it? I can't remember, it was either 64 or 68. It was when they were burning churches, but nobody talked about it. And you kind of had to skate along and pretend like you agreed with whoever you were with.
That's a good analogy.
Mm-hmm.
It is.
That is good. Anyone else? Those are all great insights. Wow.
I was not aware of Operation paperclip.
I wasn't either.
And I feel like we should have had that.
Yes.
It's part of, a big part of history of our country at that time. I just was surprised I
Never
was not
heard of it.
familiar with it. And about the time I read this, I also saw the movie Oppenheimer, which is similar in bringing German scientists over, but it wasn't,
Right.
this was in Huntsville for the space program, so totally different. And I was not aware, and I thought it was interesting that she is an Australian
Yes,
writing about this part of it.
that we didn't know about.
Yes.
Well, also, they said President Truman really was adamant, we cannot bring any scientists over who were in the Nazi party, and they we can't hear you, so, there were those at the time who were thinking this is not a good idea, but then on the other hand, we made it to the moon. And the other thing is, at the end of World War II, the thought was, if we don't get these scientists in America, Russia's going to get the scientists. And so, we need them on our side.
One thing I found, I did just finish, and most of the book I actually listened to, and they used characters with different accents. And so it made it a little easier going back and
Okay.
forth because you heard the difference instead of just having to register it, reading it in your own head.
Yeah,
And
that's
so it
great.
made a difference in a book like this to listen to the
Mhm.
book.
I think the technique can be used more effectively than she used it.
Maybe, right.
Or what my husband said is maybe you start in the middle, and then you go
Yes.
back, and then you go forward,
Yes.
But anyway,
Yes.
I'm glad I could confess to you all that I was wait a minute, I think that's the same person.
And thank you for telling us, researching and telling us that she used a computer
Right.
to produce the
The,
non.
what did she call it? Chop it
Yeah.
up?
I wonder if
I
she's
think
using
the
AI.
computer favored her.
Yeah,
I think if she had taken more, if she'd taken
Carefully.
charge of the narrative,
right,
she might have done better.
yeah. Interesting,
But you said she wrote it fast, so.
yeah.
Oh, I listened to it as well, and the different accents, and I also thought of it as a difference between Sophie and Lizzie. Well, I didn't know it was two characters, the same character either.
Good.
Because I listened to it, and it's hard to go back when you're on audio. But to me, it was about class as well.
Okay,
Class differences between Sophie and Lizzie.
I agree.
I can see that. And Sophie had the experience of, being of one class at the beginning of the war, and then everything was taken away. Although, because of his job, as he said, they lived in a gilded cage, but, her situation changed, as he pointed out, yeah. Those are good. Golly, I wish I'd have asked you all last week. No, that's really good insight. And I did enjoy the book. I'm glad I read it. And I'd like to know more about that Operation Paperclip. Thank y'all very much. Be sure to get extra cupcakes. Thank you. Okay. That wasn't it.
Thank you, Martha. You always bring in a good discussion, get our minds moving here. Thank you. Our next meeting will be Tuesday, October 14th, when Morgan Fuller will review The Girl Who Smiled Beads, which is another interesting story. So I hope you all will enjoy reading it. Thank you so much.